everyone, it's Tammy, and I have been insanely busy over the past couple weeks. So busy that I have not had time to write, research, record a new episode. So what I'm doing is re-releasing episode 2, yes, from way long ago. And if you listen to episode 2 back when it was released, it was my second episode, obviously. I was very nervous, and I also had no idea how to manage my sound quality, so the sound was horrible. I have now reworked the sound. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but I have redone the sound, I guess, and hopefully it sounds a lot better, and I hope you enjoy it if you haven't heard it, and if you have heard it, I hope you enjoy it again. I'll be back in a couple weeks with a new episode, fingers crossed, and a special announcement. All right, let's get going with episode 2, which is also now episode 22. Enjoy! Hey everyone, this is Tammy Painter, and you're listening to the Book Owl Podcast, the podcast where I entertain your inner book nerd with tales of quirky books and literary lore. These days you can click a button and have most any book printed on demand and in your hands within days. But it wasn't always so quick and easy. It really wasn't all that long ago that it took a great deal of effort to make a book. In fact, if you wanted a book printed, you might just have to make a deal with the devil. Even if the book you wanted was the Bible. But before we delve into this devilish episode, I just want to ask you for a tiny favor. Podcasts aren't the cheapest things to run. There's hosting costs, equipment, and let me tell you, they take a lot of time. So if you like what you're hearing, and if you're able to, you can show your appreciation and support the podcast by visiting thebookowlpodcast.com/support, where you'll find several super inexpensive ways to help keep the show running. Okay, that wasn't so bad, was it? Now, let's get on with the show, and the devil really is in the details with this one. So even though we're talking about devils, there's no need to fear for your immortal soul, unless you've been really naughty. See, back in the day, if you wanted a book or a newspaper, you had no choice. You had to get in league with the devil. A printer's devil, to be exact. Of course, the printing press is an invention worshipped by book nerds, and we'll explore its story some other time, but for now, just know that up until relatively recently, to make a book or a newspaper, every single letter and every single space or punctuation mark on every single printed page had to be arranged by a human hand. A very deft human hand at that. But not only did these someones who were doing this work have to lay down the letters of every word, they also had to do that in reverse, so the words, once they were printed, would read correctly. So anyone out there who complains about how tricky it can be to format a document in Word, believe me, you've got nothing to complain about. Anyway, as you can imagine, the work of a printer and typesetter was tedious and labor-intensive. But that work could be made a tiny bit easier if you had an assistant, and that assistant was called a printer's devil. This printer's devil was usually a young boy, and they may have been an apprentice, somebody that would work up the ranks and eventually take over the print shop. But their main tasks would be to mix the ink and to fetch the letters as needed, and to put the used letters back in the right place, back where they would be stored. And even though it's highly likely that there were some serious child labor laws being broken, this wasn't unskilled labor because these kids had to be somewhat literate in order to fetch the correct letter. Think about it. If you're typesetting a word like shot, you certainly don't want some illiterate rapscallion mixing up your O's and your I's. And I'll give you a moment to contemplate that. Anyway, there were some famous little devils, including Ben Franklin, Mark Twain, Walt Whitman, and John Kellogg. Yes, Mr. Cornflakes and Healthy Living himself. Alright, so anyone who can remember their grade school days on the playground know that little boys can be hellions. But why were these particular lads called devils? There's actually no clear answer on this, which of course means a slew of tales have sprouted up to answer it. Some of the tales are downright dull, while others have a wonderful dose of embellishment to them. And so we're going to cover a few right now, from the most boring to the possibly best embellished ones. So the most boring explanation says that the fingers of these boys would be stained black from the ink, and since Satan is the Lord of Darkness, the dark fingers led people to call the kids devils. See, I told you that was boring. That's like not even trying to make up a story, right? Also, I would imagine the typesetters themselves had stained fingers, so the explanation kind of falls flat on the logic meter. The second tale is a little more interesting and provides a nice play on words. So the little letters that I was talking about earlier that had to be arranged by the typesetter, these were cast onto tiny pieces of metal. And if you've ever been to a museum or looked up archives or something, you've probably seen just how small the print is on old-timey newspapers. So that gives you an idea of just how tiny these metal pieces were. Anyway, this metal, it wasn't titanium or anything strong like that. It was kind of soft. So after so many uses, the raised letters on these pieces would wear down, and anything printed would make the reader wonder if they developed sudden onset glaucoma. Instead of tormenting their customers with having to needlessly visit the eye doctor, although that probably would have been a good side swindle, the worn type was tossed into a box so the metal could then be melted down and recast. That box was called a hell box, and since it was these kids tossing things into the hell box, they earned the name devils. See, that's not too bad of a behind-the-name story, but possibly my favorite one, even though it's a bit of a stretch, starts with a partnership gone bad. Mr. Printing Press himself, Johannes Gutenberg, had a business partner who was named, I don't know how to pronounce it properly, Johann Fust? I'm going to go with Fust. Yeah. It could be Fust. It could be Fust. I don't know, but I'm going to go with Fust. Anyway, after Gutenberg's invention started revolutionizing the world, Big G started to get kind of a big head, and Fust got annoyed with Gutenberg's attitude. So he up and left one day. He was tired of it. And he did not leave empty-handed. He took all the machinery for the printing presses. Right around this time, the French court of Louis XI needed some new Bibles, as you do. Fust nabbed that commission, but when he delivered the Bibles, he told the king and all the king's men that the Bibles had been hand-copied, because this was how books were made before the printing press, and people kind of thought it was more authentic. And obviously, because these took more time, they cost more money, so Fust was, making a little extra on the side there. So you know how when you come home with new books from the library or bookstore, and you have to thumb through all of them? Well, King Louis XI, who must have been a huge book nerd, he did the same thing. And as he was flipping through and enjoying that new book smell, Louis noticed that all the Bibles were eerily similar. Too similar. After all, hand copying was normally accompanied with transcription errors, ink blotches, and other just minor differences. But all these Bibles that King Louis was flipping through, they were the exact same. So, right now, at least I was when I was reading this story, you're probably thinking an advisor should go up to the king and say, "Hey, we just got this guy Fust, who used to work with that printer guy Gutenberg, so maybe he printed these Bibles." But that didn't happen. I mean, this was the King of France after all, and you don't go around telling the king he got duped. Obviously, the only excuse for such perfection had to be that the devil had his hand in the Bible's creation. Fust, who might have only been accused of fraud, ended up being jailed for witchcraft. And I just bet Gutenberg was laughing the whole way through the trial and conviction. Anyway, so supposedly through all this roundabout story, somehow this led to the term printer's devils. And yeah, I mean, I like the story, but it's kind of a bit of a stretch to say that that was how the term printer's devil came about. So there's a fourth and final story, and this one combines legend and logic, and to me this one makes the most sense for how the term printer devil came about. When printing presses started to spread out across Europe, the printers decided they needed their own patron demon, because who doesn't, right? His name was Titivolus, and I'm going with that pronunciation. This wasn't a newbie on the demon block. He'd been the patron demon of scribes and was the go-to guy to blame when a scribe made a mistake in his manuscript copying. I mean, talk about blame shifting. In the printing world, Titivolus took on the guise of a trickster, and he would sneak in and, when no one was looking, rearrange the type that had already been set out, leading to misspelled words in the next day's paper or in the next edition of a book. And I think I like that excuse, and I'm going to start using it in my own books and newsletters. And now we get back to a little bit more blame shifting, because obviously it wasn't the typesetter's fault that there might be misspelling. It was the little kids, the assistants. And since these assistants were the ones bringing the letters, any mistake must be attributed to them being in league with Titivolus, either listening to him and, wanting to play a joke, or being possessed by the demon. And so therefore they earn the name of printers' devils. See? That's not too bad a story, right? It's got the logic, it's got the legend. It's nice. Anyway, wherever their name came from, printers' devils were hard-working little lads well into the 1900s. Then, as different methods of setting type and more efficient ways of printing evolved, the need for the assistants declined, and, without a single exorcist coming in, the devils were gone from the print shop altogether. So, that is it for printers' devils. Or is it? With every episode, I provide my newsletter recipients with some extra tidbit related to the show. And with this episode, they'll be getting one more Printer Devil story straight from 1960s television. If you're not already part of the flock and you want to be, you can sign up for the Book Owl Podcast newsletter at thebookowlpodcast.com/contact. And all these links will be in the show notes, so you don't have to worry about jotting them down. Okay, that's it for the show, but I just want to give one quick update about the podcast to finish things up. See, when I was first planning out this podcast, I wanted to follow in the footsteps of my favorite shows and release episodes every single week. And if you saw the list of topics that I want to cover, you know I have plenty of material to do just that. But what I don't have is the time. My primary focus, shall we say it's my day job, is my writing. And to keep churning out books, I'd basically have to give up on sleeping, eating, and cleaning out the guinea pig cages to be able to write, record, and edit a podcast episode every single week. Hopefully, once I get the hang of all this podcasting busy work, I'll be able to do weekly shows. But for now, and probably for at least the first 2 or 3 months, I'm going to keep myself from going absolutely bonkers by only doing bi-weekly shows, which will appear every other Thursday. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you could leave a review or simply tell someone about the show. If you do want to leave a review, you can do that in your favorite podcast app or on Podchaser, the IMDb of podcasts, and I'll toss a link to that too in the show notes. Or just feel free to email me at thebookowlpodcast.com/contact. And like I said, if you want to get even more out of each episode, be sure to subscribe to the newsletter on that same page. Again, thanks for listening, and I will hoot at you next time. The Book Owl Podcast is a production of Daisy Dog Media, copyright 2020, all rights reserved. The theme music was composed by Kevin MacLeod.